Russia sending a naval fleet to Cuba, and people are concerned about Cuban Missile Crisis 2.0. This is basically part of Russia's threat to the West because of what's currently going on in Ukraine. And I love this because the way the media is reporting it, Russian military exercise in the Caribbean, here's what to expect. That's interesting. The media could have absolutely pounced and made a story about World War III. Russia, keep it. They don't want to. Now that it's coming home, now that the funding into Ukraine is coming home to roost, the last thing the corporate press wants is to scare the American public who has blindly supported this. I'm talking to you, Harry. We all know which Harry I'm talking about. Blindly supporting Joe Biden, who is sleepwalking us quite literally into World War III. Russia's not playing around. And so the headlines are very, very light. Just military exercises. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it.
Well, and they have to keep up this narrative that Biden has really put Putin in his place, and he's very good at managing this.
Can you imagine those conversations with Joe Biden and these foreign leaders? Look, I don't care if you hate Donald Trump. I don't care.
Happened.
He doesn't even pick up. You can't imagine that Biden picks up the phone. I mean, if anything, just having Trump being able to have a conversation, some people are like, he's going to fix all this and he's going to end it day one. But just having the ability to call them and say, listen, let's talk about this. Let's figure out how we get to a solution. Or listen, here's what's going to happen. Joe Biden doesn't even have the ability to pick up the phone and call them, let alone he's strong.
Who does he talk to? Well, here's the story. 3 Russian ships and a nuclear-powered submarine are expected to arrive in Cuba this week ahead of military exercise in the Caribbean. While the exercises aren't considered a threat to the U.S., American ships have been deployed to shadow Russians, U.S. officials told CBS News. The Russian warships are expected to arrive in Havana on Wednesday and stay until next Monday, Cuba's foreign ministry said in a statement. A U.S. official told CBS News national security correspondent David Martin, the U.S. intelligence community has assessed that the submarine in the group is nuclear-powered, but it isn't carrying nuclear weapons. We have no indication and no expectation that nuclear weapons will be at play here in these exercises or embarked on those vessels. I mean, you wouldn't really know, would you? Like, they're not going to tell you they're doing it. But I certainly think that when the American people start to see these kinds of things happening more, because it ain't just here. We got this from the Daily Mail. Putin's new threat on the gateway to the Mediterranean. Russia announces joint Navy drills with Egypt near crucial Suez Canal trade route. Instability is coming. Now, I don't think most Americans care about the Suez. But if these ships in any way cause any kind of problem, a lot of people are going to be asking why Russian warships are off the coast. Now, the inverse may be true. This may be a ploy to actually blame Russia for a major attack on the U.S. as a casus belli for the U.S. to directly intervene in Ukraine.
I mean, the U.S. is, Jesus, the idea of the U.S. directly intervening in Ukraine is
and if a Russian ship fires on an American vessel and then the U.S. says Russia has declared war on us, we have to stop them now before it's too late. We're deploying troops. We've already got troops in Poland ready to go.
Yep. We've been saying for 2 years, where's the off-ramp? 2 years now. Where's the off-ramp? Wow. How do we stop the escalations? And there has been zero pullback. It's all been escalation for 2 years. It's not getting any better. If this doesn't stop, if we don't get the off-ramp, if we don't have a legitimate way for the U.S. to stop funding Ukraine and stop having American military weaponry being fired into Russia, we are going to end up in a conflict with Russia.
That's why I think about Joe Biden's comments in Normandy over the weekend were so... They are something you need to take note of. The fact that he was like, well, we never abandoned an ally. In this case, he's talking about 2 different skirmishes happening on geopolitical fronts. Joe Biden is not prepared to end anything, no matter what any international governing body decides, no matter what the people in America want. He is signaling that he is going to continue to fund conflict abroad. And I don't think that that is actually a well thought out policy.
I'm not worried about some major strike. I'm worried about what you said, which is a slip up. Right? When you start to put yourself in a position where if something happens or some mistake, and I'm not even saying that it would be intentional, but we could easily spin it that way. And I just think, this is a nuclear world we live in. And when you put yourself in a dangerous position or when you allow things to happen because there's no plan, there is no off-ramp. There never was. I mean, even from the right, these people that are supporting this money to Ukraine, it's like even they can't tell you what the solution is going to be or how we get there. Even if Trump gets in, right? They're not really putting that out there. And I just think we're putting ourselves in a position where bad things can happen. They can happen quickly. And what are we going to do? If all of a sudden something happens and we're like, oh, Russia's to blame. That's the narrative. Now we're at nuclear war. It's horrible.
Yeah. I don't think we go to nuclear war right away. But this could be exactly what the deep state, the military machine is looking for. Russian ships come our way. We say, nah, everything's fine. And then, I don't know, Gulf of Tonkin. You don't need much. The U.S. can literally just say, oh, we're under fire. Ooh. And then Joe Biden comes out, mumbles something. And then next thing we know, U.S. troops are in Ukraine, pushing into the border of Russia. U.S. weapons firing into Russia. And then Russia actually sends some ships. And then I think Hawaii is a major point of risk. Alaska as well, because China has already sent strike groups off the coast of Hawaii and Alaska.
Yeah, there's military bases on all of the Hawaiian Islands. To some degree, some are larger and some are smaller.
That's what it is. It's our Pacific military.
100%. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I mean, and the thing is, people talk about it being bad that the U.S. is doing that and blah blah blah. If the U.S. didn't do that, if the U.S. didn't have the military bases there, it wouldn't be U.S. territory, and it wouldn't go back to the Hawaiians either. Those islands will never be the Hawaiian, the property of just the Hawaiian people. The Chinese will come in, the Russians will come in. Some other big power is going to look for that little spot in the center of the biggest ocean on the earth, because that is extremely valuable.
For that matter, could you imagine a national divorce scenario? What would happen to Hawaii?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, definitely. It would definitely not be.
The restoration of who was it? King Kamehameha was the restoration of the Kamehameha bloodline.
I would not recommend being in Hawaii during the national divorce
Or Alaska.
Yeah.
If you're up in like the natives in Alaska, they're doing that thing.
I think the rest. We talk about national divorce, and I say this all the time. I think what the rest of the world will do, should there be a national divorce or some kind of civil conflict in the U.S. that would stem from an attempt at a national divorce, is totally unpredictable, and I think it's almost a guarantee that it's chaos.
Agreed.
How it goes, whether it be India and Pakistan say, okay, well, if the U.S. is out here, we're going to just start shooting nukes at each other, and that's itself. It could be something like that, like something that we don't even think of. Two small countries that have beef now, that have backing by two larger countries. We have no way. It is the possibilities for everything to go terribly wrong are almost infinite.
Do you think the average person in the rest of the world thinks that America would potentially split up, or do you think it seems impossible to them?
I think to the average person, it probably seems impossible to them. But then again,
I think they look at Joe Biden and they're probably just as confused just looking at him, and they can't even think past that.
Right. Our media is always talking about how divided we are. No. So what translates to another country? I just wonder what the impression is.
I think that other countries, I want to say no, because I think that people look at the U.S. and think of the U.S. as kind of a special country. Whether they look at it as a good thing or a bad thing, they think that it is unique. And whereas I'm not so sure, I think that people from other countries or other places that have seen that kind of strife are probably more along the lines of, well, why wouldn't it? We've seen crazy things. We've seen, our country or neighboring countries. There's been conflicts and et cetera, et cetera. Those kind of things are normal in global history. So I imagine there's a significant portion of the world population that would be like, well, why wouldn't it? It's ridiculous to think that it wouldn't, because that's what happens. Because honestly, that is what happens historically.
Right. I go back and forth because, again, I think the media does a pretty good job of saying America's in conflict and chaos and different world leaders and this, that, and the other. On the other hand, if you told me that Australia had split up, I would be like, what? No way. Right. There's a certain level of you just expect certain large countries to stay as they are forever. But we know that borders shift and, political powers change maps all the time.
My fear is that in the event of a national divorce, Canada will conquer us.
It wouldn't actually be Canada.
I'm not worrying about that.
It'd be China. It would be China via Canada.
Yeah. They would send another balloon over, and we'd take 7 days to be like, what?
It was above my house for 3 hours, that balloon.
Really?
China would show up.
Your house specifically?
Well, I'm right at Whiteman Air Force Base, a nuclear base. So, yeah.
Interesting. Good.
China would immediately contact West Coast states, offer them aid and assistance in any kind of conflict, which they would gladly accept. When Xi Jinping showed up in California, they could not roll out the red carpet fast enough.
Clean the streets.
Oh, they cleaned everything up. So if conflict really did happen, China would be like, of course we'll support you. And then California, Oregon, and Washington become vassal states of China. Alaska likely as well. I mean, either Russia can easily take back Alaska. And I'm talking about a national divorce scenario where federal forces, national military are split, weakened. That's a whole instantly becomes World War III, as Phil was saying. So just hope everybody is.
I think
bought some chickens.
think that energy is going into this election. You guys probably think this too, but I feel like so many people outside of America, but especially Americans, are like, we are on the brink of something crazy, and it feels maybe more tense than other years. I don't know how you feel about it because you're kind of on the ground with all of this stuff.
Yeah, I just think that you hear it's the most important election of our lifetime every time.
It always is.
I do believe that this is going to be like the election that I just think it'll be such a signal of where we're going to go. Yeah. And I think even for those that aren't super pro-Trump, like you just can't be in support of the current regime is like this, like you have to want to protest against it. You have to want to push back. And I just think this trial, once again, when he goes to jail, if and when he goes to prison, I think that is going to be, once again, the next moment that we will all remember. And I think it's going to help him.
We've had so many of those moments. The conviction, history being made, the indictment, the mugshot. You're living through history, ladies and gentlemen. And it's pretty wild growing up. It's mostly ancillary history. When you're reading about these major historical moments, they skip over a whole lot. It'll be like, this thing happened, and then this thing happened. And it's like, yeah, those were 3 years apart. People lived those 3 years. They were chilling. The American Revolution took place over 20 years. So there was a kid who was born 2 years into the Revolution who fought in the Revolution. That's pretty wild. So we lived most of our lives like, Desert Storm in the 90s. And, for people who are younger than that, they weren't alive. 9/11 is a huge major historical moment. And so there are some spikes. But these past couple of years have been major tumult where we're getting historical moment after historical moment. When we write about the history, when we read about the history in a general history book of late 20th century, 21st century United States, you'll get very little out of the 90s. I mean, there's some big stuff in the 90s, Bill Clinton scandal or whatever, and Kosovo, Desert Storm, etc. But then 9/11's a major. So when you're reading here's the 90s, it's going to skip over several years and hit 9/11. Then it's going to skip over several years and President Obama's elected. These past 7-8 years, it's going to be just 12 pages
per year
where everything else where everything else is a paragraph.
Right.
Especially this year, especially this November. There's going to be 12 pages based on just the week of the election in general. Because I don't think people realize, they were talking about in 2020, right-wing groups showing up with guns at various polling stations to watch and things like this. None of that happened. None of that happened. I'm pretty concerned about what the right and the left will do this election, because especially with the narrative around ballot stuffing and things like this, you're going to have every ballot box everywhere is going to have 2 or 3 dudes standing there watching everybody, filming everything.
We are not going to know who won the election, I guarantee you, until at least 5 to 6 days after.
We are never going to know who won the election.
Yes, but I'm telling you, the idea that these things are won, and this is something that I don't agree with, right? But it is the current rules we have. You have to know that these are going to go to the courts for so many of these different rule changes, and they're going to be fought again. And I just think that people need to be prepared for that. We will not know on the night of the election. We'd love to know. But I do think it will take at least 4 or 5, maybe even a week to actually have them declare a winner.
India just had an election, and they have 1 billion and change people, and they knew the answer in 17 hours. The reason
Which makes me think, maybe it's everybody else who's acting up.
You mean outside of the U.S.?
I mean, just possible. The idea that 1 billion people and they're like, got it, we're good, don't worry about it. And
if you get there's 1 billion people, you can get a bunch of people counting too. So
and to be fair, the general idea is you have a county of 1,000 people and there's 10 people watching the ballot. They all come in, and then that one county just says, okay, it's 400 here and 200 here, because not everybody votes. Submit that, and it goes up the chain, and then you easily get your results by the end of the day, because it's decentralized, massive computing power. In the United States, for whatever reason, the computers can't pull it off.
Because they don't want to. Yeah. It's literally because the government doesn't want to.
Yeah, but what happens is they batch it. So look, I've kind of gotten wonky just going through the PA primary. It was in April, right? We got a little bit of an example of this. So in Pennsylvania, there's 50 days of mail-in ballots. right? 50 days, which to me is nuts. I grew up, there was one election day, right?
Absurd.
But the problem is when they change the rules in a lot of these states, they don't say your ballot has to be in a week beforehand, and then they can count them. And then on election night, you just have the total, and you match that to the election day votes, and then you announce it. And so what happens is they batch them in different groups. They're like, hey, listen, these came in, but they didn't have a date on them. These came in because they're in an envelope, right? They have to be sealed, signed. And these are millions of ballots now. We're not talking about, absentee ballots or military ballots. So when you have a huge batch of these ballots that have no date, then this batch has no year. And then this batch, this is no month, no year. This isn't signed. This wasn't signed by a witness. So what happens is it's not that they're counting them and then not reporting it. They hold them. And this is why Republicans go nuts, as they should. And then they wait to see what they need. And then if they want, Democrats are ready to go to war. They are ready to take it to court. So they push all of them to be counted because they win so heavily on the mail-in ballots. And so the courts they don't want to disenfranchise voters, so they do it. And so that's why you get these situations where they're not reporting out. And Republicans, and I'm guilty of this, after 2020, we said, well, we don't want to do the mail-in stuff because there could be fraud. After 21, we said, let's do it in the courts and fix it. 22, they said, let's do it through legislation. And 23, they looked in the mirror and said, holy cow, we got a problem. And so now, that's like what I'm doing is in Pennsylvania, chasing these ballots. We're hiring 120 full-time ballot chasers. But I need to tell people you are still going to have the law in this country. The judicial system is going to have to make all these decisions, and we got to be prepared for it. I worry about the violence, not just with the election. I worry about when he goes to jail. You get some of these Trump supporters that want to show up and they want to make a statement, and I'm calling for peace. But I do think it is about to hit some sort of tipping point.
Thanks for checking out this clip from Timcast IRL. Make sure to watch the show live Monday through Friday at 8 p.m. Subscribe to this channel, and we will see you all there.